The death of Metallica singer James Hetfield's mom inspired him to write the song The God That Failed. She died when he was 16 due to Christian beliefs influencing her to reject cancer treatment. In 1999, a waitress was tipped a lottery ticket and won $10 million. She was then sued by her colleagues for their share. Afterwards, she was sued by the man who tipped her the ticket. Then she was kidnapped by her ex-husband and ended up shooting him in the chest. Lastly, she went to court against the IRS for more than a decade before finally winning. In 1825, painter Samuel Morse received a letter which read that his wife was sick. The next day, he received a new letter which read that she had died. 2 days later, he went to see his wife one last time only to discover she had already been buried. Distraught over the slowness of long-distance communication, he invented the Morse code. In 1977, Bob Marley was diagnosed with skin cancer on his toe and was told that having it amputated would stop the spread. But he refused the surgery since his Rastafarian religion saw amputation as a sin. By summer of 1980, the cancer had metastasized throughout Marley's entire body, and he died soon afterwards. When 2-year-old Rosalia Lombardo died from the Spanish flu in 1920, her grieving father insisted on her being preserved. Known as the Sleeping Beauty, she was one of the last to be buried in Sicily's Capuchin catacombs. This photo was taken in 1982, 62 years after she died. In the year 2000, a partially paralyzed old man was in his outhouse when the floor suddenly collapsed. He fell through and was immediately surrounded by excrement, spiders, maggots, and rats. He was stuck for more than 3 days until his mailman thankfully found him. In 1996, a man from Texas was bitten by the highly venomous coral snake. But instead of panicking, he killed the snake by biting off its head before using the snake's decapitated body as a tourniquet. Venezuelan serial killer Duran Vargas confessed to killing and eating at least 10 individuals. But he claimed he never ate fat people because he thought they had too much cholesterol. A British bomb detection dog named Theo died from stress a few hours after watching his handler get shot. The pair had set a record for bomb detection, and the dog was posthumously awarded an honor equivalent to the Victorian Cross. In 2019, a Spanish woman gave her neighbor a box full of sex toys to hold on to. 6 months later, the neighbor noticed a horrible stench coming from the box. She finally opened it and found a decomposing severed head. It was the head of the original woman's husband.
Make sure to hit a like and subscribe, okay? Subscribe to the channel.
In 2013, 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez was brutally murdered by his mother and her boyfriend after he failed to clean his room. In the 8 months prior, he was subject to horrific torture which included regular beatings, being shot in the face with a BB gun, and being pepper sprayed. Just a few days before he was murdered, he wrote a card to his mom telling her all the things that he loved about her. Before Ohio man Terry Thompson took his own life, he released 50 of his exotic animals into the wild. This resulted in 48 of them being shot dead by authorities who feared that they would attack the public. Just minutes after this photo was taken, this heroic puppy died from the venom of the cobra he killed. Though he was in pain from the venom, he smiled knowing that he prevented the dangerous snake from entering his family's home.
So recently I watched the documentary of Gabriel on Netflix. It's called The Trials of Gabriel, and let me tell you, that's one of the horrific and heinous cases I've ever seen. Like, the kid was literally 8 years old and he was tortured for months by his stepdad and his own mom.
5 hours before he was confirmed to be dead, somebody posted about Michael Jackson's death on Wikipedia with nearly exact details. No one paid attention because everyone thought it was just a prank, so no details about the original poster were ever found. While masks may save human lives, the same can't be said for wildlife. In 2020 alone, an estimated 1.5 billion masks ended up in our oceans. A British teenager was arrested after beating and stabbing 2 girls because they called him Harry Potter. In 2009, a man sued Pepsi when he was traumatized after finding a mouse in his Mountain Dew. But Pepsi attorneys said this was impossible since Mountain Dew would completely dissolve a mouse in 30 days. Pepsi won the case upon showing that the can was purchased 74 days after it was manufactured. In 1979, the King of Persia ordered the execution of 2 servants for being too loud. But since it was a holiday, he postponed their executions by 1 day and made the servants return to their 8:30 and she was late. When Bono was 14, his mother suffered an aneurysm at her own father's funeral and later died. Bono said the grief in his heart at the time was a big part of why he turned to music. A German shepherd named Tommy attends Mass every day at his local church in Italy. This is because his owner had her funeral there and he hopes that one day she will return. Australian vegan Maria Stridham wanted to prove that vegans can do anything by climbing Mount Everest. Sadly, she died while descending as a result of severe altitude sickness. In 1929, two scientists at Princeton University successfully turned a live cat into a telephone. They connected its auditory nerve to a transmitter, and when one researcher spoke through the cat's ear, the other could hear it through the receiver. The experiment was viewed as groundbreaking and led to the invention of cochlear implants. This is a photo of Princess Diana consoling Elton John at the funeral of Gianni Versace. Just over a month later, Diana would die in a car accident and Elton would perform at her funeral. Jean Calment lived to the age of 122 and was the oldest living human in history. She smoked cigarettes for 96 years from the age of 21 and only decided to quit 5 years before she died. If you're ever bitten or scratched by a wild animal, go get a rabies shot immediately. The way rabies kills, once you show symptoms, there's no way to treat it and you will almost certainly die. In 1957, a woman attending an MLB game was hit with a foul ball that broke her nose. The game was briefly paused and resumed once the woman was put on a stretcher. As they carried her away, the very next pitch was fouled off and hit the same woman, breaking a bone in her knee. Don't want wrinkles but would prefer to stay away from Botox? This woman has a solution for you. To avoid wrinkles, Tess Christian claims to have not laughed or smiled for more than 40 years, even after the birth of her daughter. The individual animal with the most human kills ever was a tiger from northern India. After a tooth injury from a gunshot left her unable to hunt normal prey, she adjusted her hunting style to go for humans instead. She was shot and killed in 1907 with an estimated 436 human kills. Jeannie Wiley was locked in a room for 13 years by her father, who wanted to protect her from the outside world. He kept her tied in a straitjacket and would bark at her like a wild dog if she made any noise. When she was finally rescued, doctors said she had the cognitive abilities of a 1-year-old baby. Napoleon Bonaparte was buried with all of his body parts except for one, his schlong. It is currently owned by a private collector in New Jersey who recently declined a $100,000 offer. Waist chopping was a popular execution method in ancient China that involved sawing the body clean in half. It was abolished in 1734 after a Chinese official was cut in half and still managed to write the Chinese word for awful 7 times in his own blood. Snake wine has been considered a therapeutic alcoholic beverage for thousands of years in China. It is produced by infusing venomous snakes in grain alcohol and is said to reinvigorate a person. This abandoned fawn was found curled up next to a fake deer that was used for target practice. This is a 1964 photo of Black Reverend Joe Carter preparing to face the Klan after he tried to vote. During tests in South Korea, access to all rooftops are typically locked. This is because students have been known to throw themselves off the roof due to the pressure of the exam. In 2005, one sheep decided to jump off a cliff, causing nearly 1,500 others to follow. However, only the first 450 were killed, since the remaining animals' falls were cushioned by the dead bodies below. Sloths only have enough energy for their weekly toilet trip to the jungle floor. So if their baby ever falls to the ground, they must choose to preserve their energy and leave it to be eaten. A San Francisco man tweeted this just 5 minutes before being the victim of a random drive-by shooting. In 2015, a Colombian man had a tapeworm inside of him that got cancer. The cancer then metastasized and the man eventually died from tumors of tapeworm throughout his entire body. A 24-year-old nurse in India was set on fire by her ex-boyfriend after she rejected his advances. But police say the woman caught hold of him tightly so that he couldn't escape after killing her. While the woman died on the spot, the man suffered for days before succumbing to his injuries during treatment. This is why saturation diving is one of the highest paying jobs in the world. In 1983, 4 rig workers were working deep in a diving chamber in the North Sea. When one of the men opened a hatch too early, the chamber quickly depressurized and dropped from 9 atmospheres of pressure to 1 in less than a second. All 4 men were killed instantly as the pressure was so explosive that it caused 3 of the divers' blood to flash boil. The fourth diver wasn't any luckier as he was forced through a small opening and violently torn apart. According to the autopsy, all of the organs of his chest were launched out of his body and projected upwards more than 30 feet. All of the men likely died immediately, but the investigators were never the same after discovering such a gruesome scene. Kim Jong-un travels with his own toilet to prevent his excretions from falling into the wrong hands. The waste contains important information about his health status and can't be left behind. In the 1960s, the CIA spent $20 million on a cat equipped with gear to spy on the Soviets. Sadly, the operation was cancelled when the cat was hit and killed by a taxi almost immediately. A 115-year-old woman from Nepal has been smoking at least one pack of cigarettes per day since 1920. She claims that smoking has aided in her longevity and that all the doctors who advised her to quit have already died. Despite growing up deaf and blind, Helen Keller was a supporter of eugenics. She believed that infants who were born with severe mental or physical disabilities were better off dying. Tobacco companies spend the most money on advertising during the month of January. This is because January is when most people are trying to quit as New Year's resolutions. This is a photo of an Iraqi officer with a fearless expression on his face just moments before being beheaded by an ISIS militant. Mike Tyson got into his first fight after a bully ripped the head off of one of his pigeons. He said that the pigeon was the first thing that he ever loved and inspired him to become a fighter. There are more Panda Express locations in the world than actual pandas. When people die from Alzheimer's, it's usually because the disease got so bad that they forgot how to swallow or breathe. There's a blue whale who sings at such a high frequency that he's unable to communicate with other whales. Nicknamed 52 Blue, his calls have been heard every year since the 1980s but never receive a response. He's been called the world's loneliest whale. After being convicted for the murder of Deborah Reese in 1993, Liddell Lee maintained his innocence for 24 years. Before his execution in 2017, his last words were, "I am an innocent man." Just a few days ago, a different man's DNA was found on the murder weapon. Only 1 out of every 1,000 sea turtles born actually make it to adulthood. Fatal familial insomnia is a rare incurable brain disease that progressively destroys your brain's ability to sleep. Eventually, you stop sleeping altogether, go completely insane, suffer from seizures, and die from cardiac arrest. This is a photo of a professional violinist playing her instrument as surgeons remove a tumor from her brain. Doctors asked her to play the violin so that her musical abilities wouldn't be damaged during the procedure. In 1944, a group of American airmen were shot down by the Japanese. Out of the 10 men, 9 of them were captured, tortured, executed, and cannibalized. The only man who evaded capture and survived was future President George H.W. Bush. In 2000, Americans died from poisoning by their own government. After Vincent van Gogh shot himself in the chest with a revolver, he managed to walk home and see 2 doctors. But since neither of them was a surgeon, they couldn't remove the bullet, and they left him alone in his room smoking a pipe. He died the next morning with his brother by his side, who said Vincent's last words were, "The sadness will last forever." A girl who grew up in Auschwitz drew this picture of home while living in a residence for disturbed children. When Elvia Cortez went to feed her cows one morning, 4 men quickly approached her and put a bomb around her neck. They left a tape asking for $7,500 and threatened to set off the bomb if she tried to disarm it. Elvia called the police and a bomb tech showed up later in the day to remove it. A few hours later, the bomb suddenly went off and killed both of them, and the men responsible were never found. Lama Itigilov was a Buddhist said to have reached nirvana, the final goal of Buddhism. This is due to the lifelike state of his corpse, which is not subject to macroscopic decay even though he was never embalmed. He died in 1927, and upon the latest examination in 2005, Scientists stated his body was in the condition of someone who had died just 36 hours ago. In 2009, an Indian doctor removed 172,000 kidney stones from a single kidney. Both the patient and surgeon now hold Guinness World Records that will hopefully never be broken. In 1961, Soviet doctor Leonid Rogozov was working in Antarctica when he realized he had appendicitis. He knew he would die if his appendix wasn't removed, but he was the only doctor on the expedition. So he ended up performing the surgery on himself and miraculously recovered. When Pablo Picasso died in 1973, his wife wouldn't allow their grandson Pablito attend the funeral. Little Pablito responded by drinking a bottle of bleach, which damaged his organs so badly that he couldn't eat anymore. After 3 months of suffering, he died. Lake Nyos in Cameroon periodically releases a cloud of invisible carbon dioxide that suffocates everything within a 16-mile radius. In 1986, 1,700 people and all of their livestock suddenly died without even understanding what was happening to them. In 1949, Timothy Evans was wrongly executed for murdering his wife and daughter. The actual murderer, John Christie, was a prosecution witness at Evans's trial. After Evans was executed, Christie went on to kill 4 more people. The government didn't acknowledge that Evans was innocent until 2004. Described by the media as the world's worst serial killer, Luis Garavito is responsible for the murder of over 100 young boys. After a total of only 22 years served, he will be released from Colombian prison this year. After teenager Amy Billig disappeared in 1974, her mother began receiving phone calls from a man claiming Amy was serving as his slave. The chilling calls continued for more than 20 years, but the case was never solved. In 1933, a doctor named Carl Tanzler raided the grave of a female patient with whom he'd become obsessed before she died. He stole her body from the tomb and lived with her corpse for 7 years. As her body fell apart, he attached the bones together using coat hangers and fitted her face with glass eyes. He was only caught when someone saw him dancing with the corpse in front of an open window.